On the north coast of Wales, overlooking the sea, sits a foreboding castle.
This looks like something out of a medieval fairy tale, like a home for princes and princesses.
It's a grand palace of a building with so many rooms, embattled towers, and amazing windows. Somebody clearly wanted to impress and make an impact.
"50 miles from New York City, on an island on the Hudson River, is the mysterious and abandoned Bannerman's Castle. But back in 1908, it stored one of the largest private collections of Army surplus and ammunition ever seen in the United States.
Army surplus stores are everywhere today, but that wasn't always the case. It's thanks to Bannerman. He's the one who bought this stuff. Nobody else cared. And before long, Hollywood, Broadway, they're turning to him, and him only, for their props.
To be closer to his ammunition, Bannerman moves his family into his own purpose-built castle. But the patchwork construction and the surplus stock within lay the foundations for destruction.
I love the idea of taking scrap bits of metal and material and making something fantastic out of it. The one thing I wouldn't recommend is doing that on a structure, because ultimately, if you're going to live in there, it needs to stand up. I definitely wouldn't want to live there.
On August 15th, 1920, disaster strikes.
His wife was here, Helen Bannerman. She was up at the residence, sitting in her hammock, and as soon as she got up, she went into the house to get a cup of tea. She turned around, and the building blew up, and a piece of that building went right in the hammock where she was sitting.
200 pounds of black powder stored in the powder house explodes, throwing a 25-feet section of wall across the river onto the railway tracks. But miraculously, Bannerman's castle complex survives the explosion. For the next 30 years, as Bannerman's business dwindles, his island complex falls into disrepair. And in 1969, a catastrophic fire that burns for 3 days seals its fate. Bannerman's Castle is abandoned. Today, the ruins are being stabilized, and Bannerman's Island is becoming a popular tourist attraction and venue. Francis Bannerman's fantasy castle continues to frighten all those who see it.
He left an incredible building here, which is an icon all over the world. People come and ask about Bannerman Island.
Clearly, Bannerman's building is in a state of disrepair. It will require millions to restore, but I think we should make the effort because this is a slice of history that, well, frankly, I don't think should be forgotten.
In the rolling hills of Guatape in Colombia, beside a shimmering turquoise lake, is a battered ruin that looks altogether out of place.
On the shores of this enormous lake stands the ruins of something. It's not really clear what.
It looks forgotten, and in places it's badly damaged, yet it clearly bears the hallmarks of a luxury resort.
Many people who come and visit this mansion feel all sorts of strange things.
A collection of buildings in various states of disrepair sprawl across 20 acres of this dramatic peninsula.
Throughout the entire complex, there's a funny combination of things. Towers that look like they might be guard towers, or maybe it's an ornamental feature. It looks a little bit like a cross between a Playboy mansion and some kind of military fort.
Vegetation consumes much of the structure now, growing through the roof and the crumbling facade.
As you get closer, you can see some odd details. The walls are very thick or hollow in some places. There's signs of some kind of enormous explosion. So this place clearly has a story to tell.
Who lived here? What caused this destruction? And why did this become one of the most dangerous places on Earth? In 1983, hundreds of laborers, each with a specific job, got to work on this idyllic complex. No expense was spared.
It had a swimming pool, tennis courts, a football pitch, none of which sound out of the ordinary. But that football pitch doubled up as a helipad, and it also had its own private seaplane dock. This place was anything but ordinary.
William Jimenez is a local resident and was employed here as a security guard.
It took almost 7 years to build the structures that you can see here today.
Through these long years of construction, the surrounding area went through a period of extraordinary transformation, and not for the better. Just 25 miles away is the town of Medellin. By the mid-1980s, it was referred to as the murder capital of the world. It was home to the infamous Medellin cartel, which at its height was amassing up to $60 million a day in drug profits. And its founding father was Pablo Escobar.
When you're Pablo Escobar, you can never really relax. He was always surrounded by security. He had armed guards, he had walls that were built like the walls of a fortress. Escobar wanted to be ready for anything.
Needing a safe retreat for his family, Escobar built this, Hacienda La Manuela. Named after his own daughter, it was his family who would primarily enjoy this complex.
His family used to stay here occasionally. His mother, his wife, and his children. It was an ordinary thing. It was not a hiding place.
This was one of a string of palatial properties enjoyed by Escobar's family. One nearby included a bullfighting arena and a zoo. Hacienda La Manuela, though less extravagant, had secret compartments, cavities, and a maze of corridors. To go with the helicopters and speedboats ready to provide a rapid getaway across the surrounding waters. For all its luxury, security was always a priority.
Pablo Escobar had this family retreat protected by a 120-strong security staff. It was basically a small army.
Imagine the paradox of this place. Escobar wants it to be a lovely family retreat, swimming pool for the kids. Meanwhile, he's got shipments of drugs and cash moving through. He's got the place surrounded by armed guards and seaplanes and speedboats coming in and out. It can't have been the most relaxing spot in the world.
Pablo himself was only seen here in short flashes.
Pablo was here 2 or 3 times maximum, but he used to spend only a few hours here and leave. He wouldn't even stay overnight.
When you're the 7th richest man in the world, you gotta watch your back at all times.
By the early 1990s, Escobar was embroiled in an all-out war with the Colombian government. And after a stint in a luxury jail of his own design, he found himself on the run again. With at least 80% of the U.S. cocaine market supplied by his Medellin cartel, he was now a target not just for Colombian authorities and the U.S. government, but also rival cartels. And the staff at this mansion, including security guard William Jimenez, were soon drawn into the conflict.
In 1993, some of Escobar's rivals managed to infiltrate the compound.
What happened was that 6 small pickups and 1 van came, full of people. It was around midnight. They placed 2 bombs, one on that side and one on this side.
They stashed this huge quantity of explosives in a bathroom and blew it up.
This was where they placed the biggest bomb. There was a huge explosion. Everything you can imagine was shaking. In this area, there was a bathroom, and that is where the bomb exploded upwards and destroyed the walls around it. It was such a powerful explosion.
In 1993, bombs were smuggled into the compound, causing a huge explosion. The organization thought to be responsible was Los Pepes, short for Persecuted by Pablo Escobar. This was a vigilante group formed by victims of Escobar's drug war. CIA documents released in 2008 suggest Colombian intelligence officers were in contact with Los Pepes.
In fact, it was probably funded by his rivals in the Cali cartel. We'll never really know for sure, but this bombing was kind of the beginning of the end for Escobar.
Medellin became a battleground for Escobar's war of supremacy against rival cartels and also the Colombian and American governments. Escobar was offering reward money to anyone who would kill a Colombian police officer. So the bombing of this mansion was too good an opportunity for the police to pass up.
Police forces quickly swooped in and seized all the drugs and money now exposed by the damage from the explosion.
Though no one had been killed, for William and many others who worked here at Escobar's mansion, the impact was still devastating.
After the attack, things were really hard, not because of the mansion itself, but because a lot of people, I'm talking 200, 300 people from this area, lost their jobs. That was the hardest part to me.
Meanwhile, the net was closing in around the so-called king of cocaine.
He corrupted the Colombian government and law enforcement to a large degree. Nonetheless, they still came after him, and the end wasn't too far away for him.
Leading the manhunt was Colonel Hugo Martinez of Colombia's National Police. Tracking Escobar for years, he had turned down various bribes, his life under constant threat. Martinez eventually managed to pinpoint Escobar's location using radio triangulation technology. A firefight ensued. Escobar and his bodyguard were shot down as they fled across the rooftops. He died one of the greatest outlaws in history. The collateral damage there for all to see.
As it happens, in most wars, many innocent people die. People who have nothing to do with it. And this has happened in Medellin, in Bogota, and in many other places in Colombia.
Today, Escobar's properties face a range of fates. Some have been demolished, others turned into theme parks. But this ruined mansion remains trapped in a strange form of limbo.
At the moment, I'm in a legal dispute with the government to have ownership of this mansion. I have been looking after it. I have maintained and ensured that no one else would invade it.
Deciding on the proper use for a drug-funded property and the profits from its sale is a touchy and legally complicated subject. To this day, Pablo Escobar remains a hugely divisive figure in Colombia. There are those who still revere him as this national hero, but for others caught in the crossfire and the violence, he represents everything wrong with the country.
On the north coast of Wales, overlooking the sea, sits a foreboding castle.
This looks like something out of a medieval fairy tale, like a home for princes and princesses.
It's a grand palace of a building with so many rooms, embattled towers and amazing windows. Somebody clearly wanted to impress and make an impact.
But as striking as it appears from the outside, once you venture in through the arches, the feel of the place takes a turn.
If you ever wanted to visit a haunted mansion, this place has got it all. You've got your Gothic architecture, your faded grandeur, your air of mystery and terror.
Rumors of hauntings float around the place, and every wall tells a story. Marriages gone terribly wrong, battles, and children fleeing from cruel and deadly fates.
This site's story isn't quite what it seems.
What's strange is that although it looks ancient, there's parts of this building that don't look that old at all.
You can see this was once a glorious structure, but now it's just crumbling away and disintegrating. It's as though the life has been sucked from the place.
It looks so sad and abandoned. What went wrong here?
Contained within these crumbling walls are stories of ambition, families at war, and a people saved from slaughter. Yet there is something strange about this defensive stronghold.
There's some clever trickery at play here, because it's clearly been made to look like something it isn't.
Dr. Mark Barker is an architectural historian. He's spent the last 20 years investigating this building's deepest secrets.
So this looks like a medieval fortress, but as we look around, you'll find out that there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Inside are clues that betray the true age of this structure.
So one of the telltale signs that you can pick up looking around the building that it's not as ancient as you think are the windows. And the windows are made out of cast iron, which was the wonder material of the early 19th centuries, the PVC of the day.
So if this wasn't a medieval castle, then why did someone spend a fortune making it look like one? And would those defensive walls ever be called upon?
This place was commissioned by the wealthy industrialist Lloyd Hesketh in 1812. It was the largest structure to be erected in Britain in the 19th century, and at its peak boasted an estate of over 6,000 acres.
Many said that Hesketh was a dreamer, but he had a bold and ambitious plan, one that he hoped would influence architecture forever.
It all seems to centre around the loss of his mother when he was around about 11 or 12. And he wanted to build a monument to her and to immortalise her in architecture.
This was Lloyd Hesketh's masterpiece, a lavish 19th century imitation of a much earlier time. Grich Castle.
So in Wales, we are famous for the medieval castles of the native princes, and Lloyd knew this when he was building here, and he set about looking back at the medieval castles, but also all the medieval manuscripts, working out how they actually did it properly.
It is a hugely significant structure, as it was the first Gothic folly in all of Europe.
Lloyd's dream may have come true, but this isn't a story of happily ever after. A bitter family feud was brewing. The horrors of war were on the horizon, and a haunting presence would soon be felt.
Hesketh lived in this castle for many years. It was his home, and then it got passed down through his family, eventually coming into the ownership of his granddaughter in 1894.
Inheriting the castle and the estate meant that the Countess of Dundonald was a woman of very great means. Like her grandfather before her, she left her mark on the castle in a very unique way.
Adding her own touches to the building, like this grand marble staircase, the Countess's presence can still be felt here. But her more public showings were what caused a real stir, and may have sowed the seeds for what was to come.
She was a very strong-minded person who fought heavily for women's rights and was a key figure in the suffragette movement. This was extraordinary at the time, but apparently the marriage was a very unhappy one, and her husband treated her cruelly.
She was really very forward-thinking, and I think this was very disturbing to her husband. He was a Victorian gentleman, really, that he should have complete control, and she refused.
What's astonishing was that in 1906, she did something that was unheard of. Bear in mind that her husband had all of the power over this property. She actually banished him from the castle and cut him out of her will entirely.
The Countess managed the estate on her own for 20 years until her death, when it was put up for sale. But its story was far from over.
As it turns out, the Countess's estranged husband wouldn't let things lie. He bought back the castle.
And he bought it back out of spite. And it was a great tragedy that occurred that he destroyed all of her papers. The contents of the castle were sold off. And his parting shot was that he said to the children that no member of the family shall ever live here again.
According to some accounts, the Countess was determined to exact her revenge, even from beyond the grave. In North Wales, the old ruins of a castle cling to the hillside. At the start of the 20th century, a troubling battle for this place ensued, and it would leave a strange mark on this site for years to come.
Just a few years after the Countess's death, her estranged husband bought the castle. He sold off much of the contents to finance the purchase, but he was determined to make it his again.
Shortly after the collection was broken up in 1928, people started to see a figure on the marble staircase. A woman seen walking down the stairs and also in the gardens. One of the most famous sightings was by a boxer called Randolph Turpin, who was training in the park, and he saw this woman in white walking towards him, crying, and then he turned to ask what was wrong, and she disappeared.
But these hauntings were not tales of horror. In fact, this place would turn into a scene of hope. As a ruthless tyrant spread fear and suffering all over Europe, the walls of this Gothic fortress offered sanctuary to the 20th century's dispossessed.
This was a time when World War II was on the horizon, and Britain knew only too well what this would mean for the children. So what it did was it evacuated 10,000 predominantly Jewish children from Germany, Poland, Austria, Czechoslovakia to Britain.
It was known as the Kindertransport, and the children were taken to farms, foster homes and schools across the country, with 200 of them coming here to the castle.
It would have been heart-wrenching for these children to be pulled away from their parents at such a young age, brought to a completely foreign country. But what is truly horrifying is these children were often the only surviving members of their family after the Holocaust.
After the war, the castle opened to the public, one of the first country houses in Britain to do so. But with the cost of upkeep too high, it soon fell into disrepair.
The castle was extensively looted and vandalized, reduced to a derelict shell. But then the final blow came when a fire broke out and caused devastating damage to the structure.
For years, the castle sat forgotten until an 11-year-old boy fell under its spell. This fairy tale had one last twist.
So I would pass the castle every day to and from school, and it really kind of invoked something in me wanting to save the place. That drove me on to set up the trust.
Mark now leads a team dedicated to restoring Grich Castle to its former glory. Its future now secured for generations to come.
In its short life, the castle has seen many fascinating and important events. Hopefully it can be brought back from the dead so that it can do so again.
Slovakia in Central Europe, 60 miles from the capital city. Here lies a castle and the scene of one of the bloodiest scandals of 17th century Europe.
Looking up onto the hillside, clearly man has made its mark here in a very fortified, defensive kind of way.
It doesn't seem big enough to be a fort, and dare I say it, it's not grand enough to be a palace.
Two towers loom over the grounds. One leads into a 10-foot deep pit.
It's a hole in the ground. It looks like a dungeon.
The other tower is reduced to just one perilous standing wall.
This isn't just nature has destroyed this. There's been some kind of deliberate effort too.
The perimeter walls lined with cannon battlements suggest a violent past.
If you're expecting uninvited guests, this is the perfect spot to be. It looks like it's ready for an attack.
The events that took place here became folklore, then legend. A reminder that history is written by the victors. It's the year 1610, and echoing from the basement of the castle are the most blood-curdling screams. Young women are suffering unbearable torture at the hands of a psychopath.
It was 8 girls who suffered this way.
Marcela Bednarova grew up hearing the stories of the castle.
The girls were humiliated. And there were some psychological and sexual torture as well. They were waiting for their destiny in shackles.
The girls were made to stand naked in the cold cellar for days.
The rumors surrounding this place are extremely disturbing. And we don't know exactly what happened here, but everyone who knows something about this place agrees that it was terrible.
This is Csaktise Castle. Originally built in the 13th century to defend the border of the Hungarian Empire. For generations, the castle was traded between warring noble families until 1604, when a countess called Elizabeth Bathory changed the castle and the town forever.
When Elizabeth, in her early 40s, as a widow, moved full-time into the castle, she must have appeared unbelievably glamorous to the local villagers with their hard lives. She had this sort of youthful glow about her.
Elizabeth inherited the castle upon the death of her husband, a member of the powerful Nadasti family.
She inherited all of his property, and suddenly she was the head of a wealthy, noble household, possibly one of the most powerful single women in Hungary at the time, in a period when women were largely treated as second-class citizens.
As Countess of Csaktise, Elizabeth invited young women into these rooms to sweep the floors and cook her meals.
In her 40s, she's there offering a school, basically, for other young noble women. It wasn't uncommon, it was a normal thing to do, to go and live with another family and learn how to housekeep, how to prepare for marriage and life ahead.
But events were about to show the true cruelty of the 17th century Hungarian nobility.
Rumors started to circulate. The girls who went to Csaktise Castle didn't always come back.
On December 29th, 1610, a squad of soldiers stormed through the castle gate and searched the grounds.
When the soldiers looked around, they found one dead girl Then 2 girls were reported injured or almost dying with visible marks of cruelty or violence.
One of them was already dead, but the other still had just enough life force to point the finger at her killer, Elizabeth.
The young widow may have been a woman in a man's world, but she also had a reputation for barbarism.
It's said that she physically hurt her students for minor infractions, like folding the sheets wrong or spilling water, even for just looking at her the wrong way.
The punishments ranged, what the stories say, everything from just a slap around the face to drawing blood. And then it got more and more gruesome.
Supposedly, she would prick them with sewing needles.
She bit them until she drew blood. She smeared honey on them and exposed them to bees and ants.
Cut them with scissors.
Scald them with hot metal bars.
Leaving girls out in the cold to freeze to death.
And one of her most notorious acts happened inside the castle's dungeon.
Elizabeth needed her manor house free because she expected the visit of her daughter Anna. So she ordered the girls to move up to the castle to stay there during the daughter's visit.
The girls were made to stand naked in the cold cellar for days. When they were let out, some of them could barely even walk, and they were killed very soon afterwards.
It's said that Elizabeth Bathory killed up to 600 young girls. She literally has a Guinness World Record for it.
The rumors of Elizabeth's savagery go all the way back to her childhood.
She came from a family notorious for its alcoholism, incest, and sexual deviancy. When she was young, she suffered from terrible migraines, which her family diagnosed as demonic possession. It's said that she even bathed in the blood of her victims. That might explain the youthful complexion.
With the finger pointed at the Countess, the soldiers arrested Elizabeth. She was tried and banished to her castle tower for the rest of her days. The tyranny of the bloody Countess was over. But not everything is as it seems in this grim fairy tale.
There's one thing that doesn't quite add up here. Out of an alleged 600 or more victims of Elizabeth, we haven't found a single grave or a single skeleton. Nothing.
The man who arrested her and found all the bodies just so happened to be head of a rival house in the neighboring province, which is unreliable and suspicious.
Elizabeth was clever, she was literate, she could speak 4 languages. She was also a woman. She had a massive target on her back.
Looking at this as a lawyer, despite concerns over the evidence, I can't help but think that there was something ghastly going on in that castle. It's very rare that there's any smoke without fire.
So either Elizabeth Bathory, the bloody Countess, was a stone-cold mass murderer of young girls, or she was a powerful but innocent woman framed by her unscrupulous rivals. We may never know for sure.
The castle stood for another 100 years until it was sacked in a rebellion. What remains is now open to tourists seeking to learn about the legend of Elizabeth Bathory. Among 10 of the world's most iconic abandoned places, game-changing moments in history are not forgotten, and notorious bygone characters leave their indelible mark. At number 5, in the East China Sea, 1,000 miles from Tokyo, on the Japanese island of Okinawa, is a steep hillside with a strange blend of ruins.
Looking across the water toward this rising ground, a dominating ridge with some structures visible.
Somebody has taken serious care to turn these hills into fortifications.
Descending into dense vegetation, beyond the warning signs are entrances to another world.
Built into a mountain, you'd never even know this complex was here. It's pretty much impossible to access unless you were led inside.
I also see evidence of battle. I see shell fragments or bullet holes around.
It's interesting that in one of the chambers, you can still see text in Japanese that reads, "Destroy America."
How did these underground facilities contribute to some of the bloodiest and most famous battles in history?
On this ridge are the remains of an important site of spiritual significance. But to Americans, this ridge means something else entirely. This is related to one of the most iconic stories in US history.
Aki Miyazato has spent the last decade investigating what happened on this island. Markings on these tunnel walls are a vital sign.
So the writings in this wall says, "Destroy America." So this is the commander, Rear Admiral Ota's room. And he sent a telegram sent out to mainland Japan praising Okinawans. After that, on June 13th, 1945, he committed suicide in this room with his close officers.
Rear Admiral Ota commanded Japan's naval forces at the end of the Second World War, when the Americans invaded during the Battle of Okinawa. These tunnels sit below the Maida Escarpment, otherwise known as Hacksaw Ridge. April 26, 1945. Men of the U.S. Army 77th Infantry Division wait anxiously beneath the almost vertical 400-foot cliff.
More than 180,000 US Army and US Marine Corps troops descended on this island for one final push.
Planners assumed that they would be resisted every step of the way. They used naval gunfire support to absolutely muller the place. They bashed Hacksaw Ridge so hard that nothing is going to be left alive on the surface.
Following the onslaught, U.S. infantrymen claw their way up ladders to the smoke-filled ridge above. At first, the enemy is nowhere to be seen.
But then once they get onto the cliff, the Japanese, who are invisible, can pop up and start blazing away. They're retreating into these fortifications, forcing the Americans to dig them out and take tremendous casualties.
Caught off guard, the troops are driven back by a hail of gunfire. Among them is Desmond Doss, a Seventh-day Adventist who refuses to hold or fire a rifle.
Instead of joining the retreat back down to the beach, Doss continues to collect wounded up on this, fire-ravaged ridge top.
Not only does Doss rescue his own captain, but he also rescues 75 of his comrades. Doss isn't going to fight, but what Doss is going to do is save American lives as long as he possibly can.
Carrying them one by one to the edge of the escarpment, he lowers them by rope down the cliff face.
It is a remarkable and heroic story. You can see why it was picked up by Hollywood. It was made for the silver screen.
In Scotland's Loch Lomond is the setting for one of the strangest stories of the Second World War.
What makes this castle so bewitching is how it has almost merged with nature over the years. It's been basically encroached upon by the surrounding woods.
Just to get to it, you've got to climb over a barbed wire fence and fight your way through thorny bushes.
Trespassers have been beguiled by the castle ruin, but it's a place of hidden dangers.
This is a grand place, and it's been consumed by this jungle of a forest. It's a bit like a fairy tale in there. It's all rather beautiful.
But don't let that beauty fool you. This place is derelict and seriously dangerous. There's falling stone from walls in all directions. And that's just the danger that's above you. Below, you can see these holes in the floor, and in some parts, it's caved in completely.
Layers of dirt obscure deadly booby traps, a side effect of being open to the elements.
Most places you stand in the building, you can see the sky. There are 3 or 4 floors above you, but they're just gone.
And one of the most striking features is as you walk in, there's this massive beam, presumably from the roof, that is just toppled down into the interior, into the keep of this castle. And it's just kind of stuck in the ground.
An historic castle on the edge of collapse, still standing to tell its story. Today, visitors aren't welcome in the castle ruin, but 80 years ago, it was safe haven for hundreds of people.
During the Second World War, this was used as a military hospital, but the building is much older than that.
John Carruthers preserves the history of the Loch Lomond region. This is the first time he's been allowed inside the grounds.
There's one fireplace, 2 fireplaces. Looks like a spiral stair with a door coming in up there. It must have been a grand place in its day. Such a shambles now.
It has these beautiful, almost Gothic stone walls and spiral staircases. And scattered on the floor are these Victorian-looking metal brackets that were once used for holding up the ceiling.
Just looking at the cast iron beams, which have not yet broken, obviously supported the upper floors. Imagine getting these heavy beams into this place. Quite immense.
Then we find the old entrance room. It's a huge space with a beautiful grand fireplace. This wasn't only built as a place for sick people.
This is Buchanan Castle. It's a name that reverberates in local folklore, because Buchanan is the name of one of Scotland's proud clan families.
The clans were very important. North of the Central Belt, they really ruled the roost.
Clans themselves were more like tribes, and to be a member of a clan, like the Buchanan clan, you could be Buchanan by blood, or you could be Buchanan by alliance and affiliation.
It can get quite bloody. They were always having rivalries, stealing cattle, stealing women, all the usual things that you would expect.
The clan chiefs were de facto kings of their lands. They built these castles to rule from.
Here we have basements or cellars, I'm not sure. Massive, massive underbuilding. Maybe that's where they kept the wine.
The Buchanans have a very active history in Scotland, dating back to the 1400s when they make a very risky move to ally with the French against the English, which, was fraught with peril because the English were closer to hand, they had bigger armies, they were always agitating on the frontier, so this could have meant disaster for the Buchanan clan.
But it wasn't the English who left this place in ruin.
Well, Buchanans had been the dominant family, ruled the roost around here for, 700 years? And in the early 1600s, they fell upon hard times. But in addition to that, the 22nd Laird failed to produce a male heir. And for the combination of these effects was that the estate was put on the market.
The Buchanan dynasty was over, and their family home would share its fate. A neighboring clan purchased the land and built a new castle, which still stands in ruin.
It must have been a wonderful place in its day. I'm sure the great and the good used to frequent Buchanan Castle from time to time, weekend parties and all the rest of it.
The new castle became a house of leisure, but in the Second World War, it would be repurposed as a field hospital. And on one evening in 1941, a doctor serving here received an unusual patient.
On May 12th, Dr. J. Gibson Graham was stationed at Buchanan Castle, now called the Dryman Military Hospital. A pilot was brought to him, going by the name of Alfred Horn, who'd injured himself when bailing out of his aircraft over a wheat field.
The doctor noted in his memoir that his patient was a sallow man of good physique, and he spoke good English.
He had a commanding presence. He clearly regarded himself as an important person and expected to be treated likewise.
Alfred Horn's real name was Rudolf Hess, deputy leader of Nazi Germany. And he'd come here to meet an old friend.
In the course of his early time in the military hospital, in the ward, there were suspicions amongst his fellow patients that he wasn't just a simple Hauptmann Horn. There was more to this than met the eye.
After his injuries were seen to, Horn was taken for questioning. There he revealed his true identity. His name was Rudolf Walter Richard Hess, second in command of the Third Reich.
Hess joined the Nazi Party very early on and formed a close friendship with a young Adolf Hitler. Some people have called him Hitler's most loyal follower.
But after the Nazis came to power, Hess's influence on the Führer had diminished.
He was a very weak man, and he was being pushed out by more aggressive Nazis like Goering, like Himmler, like Bormann. And so it's been speculated that he flew to Scotland basically to try to win favor with Hitler.
Hess's plan was to meet someone who had influence over the British Prime Minister. He was looking for the Duke of Hamilton.
The Dukes of Hamilton, they're one of the ancient Scottish noble families. He's met the Duke of Hamilton in receptions in the past. But as it turns out, the Duke of Hamilton has no interest in helping Rudolf Hess. When informed of this plan, he doesn't want to get his hands dirty, refuses to be helpful.
With or without the help of the Duke, word reached Churchill that Hess was in Britain. But the deputy's offer for peace was ignored.
Churchill says, I don't want to hear from Rudolf Hess. That would look bad. I've committed to fighting these people on the beaches, on the landing grounds, never surrendering. Why do I want to negotiate with this sort of fallen Nazi?
Hess's plan had failed.
When the mission is revealed to Hitler, he's aghast, ashamed. So predictably, Dr. Joseph Goebbels, the head of Nazi propaganda, comes out and totally disowns Hess, says he's crazy, says we have no idea how this happened.
With his mission a failure and his career in ruin, the disgraced Rudolf Hess could only confide in one friend.
I think that the doctor began to become sympathetic, perhaps not quite the right word, but at least understanding of Hess, and a reasonably close relationship was actually formed.
So on May 17th, Hess and Dr. Gibson Graham left Buchanan House and started a new journey to the Tower of London.
Rudolf Hess spent the rest of his life in prison. After the war, Dryman Military Hospital was decommissioned, and the castle fell into disrepair. Now all that's left of Buchanan Castle is an empty shell, waiting to collapse. In central Germany, At the top of a hill is a castle with a famous name.
You see this ruined castle looming over the hills, and it's hard not to imagine ancient stories that come to mind once you hear the name of the place.
The castle really uses its surroundings to its advantage. The solid granite it's built on acts as a protective barrier.
Beyond the walls are signs that visitors are not welcome.
Once you're inside the castle, your imagination takes over because you can see staircases, towers, a ruined old chapel. This clearly was a very formidable castle.
In the center of the castle's grounds is a structure that can be seen for miles around.
The thing that stands out most dramatically is this watchtower that was clearly part of some kind of fortification.
A hilltop castle, high above a dark forest, a setting for any good fairy tale.
There really can't be many people in the world who don't know the name of this place, because it's the name of a notorious fictional character.
This is Castle Frankenstein.
Approaching this place is a journey of the senses, because to get to it, you have to hike through a dense atmospheric forest.
Many fairy tales were also told here. The Brothers Grimm from Hanau recorded many legends.
Ralph Eberhard has heard all the stories of this castle.
The first mention by name of this castle was the family Prolberg, who live in the super castle of Frankenstein. Family Frankenstein still lives today. They actually do exist to this day.
In the castle's chapel is a statue, but Ralph believes this is not a member of the Frankenstein family.
Based on this sculpture, he was 1.8 meters tall, which would have been much too tall for his time. Why Dipple was depicted in this way is beyond my knowledge.
He believes the 5'11" statue is of a former resident of the castle, Johann Conrad Dipple.
Dipple was born there in 1673. He came from a long line of Lutheran clergymen, and his father very much wanted young Conrad to follow in the family footsteps, so he undertook the boy's education here in the castle.
Dipple grew up in the ways of the church, but he also had an aptitude for science.
Dipple was intellectually ahead of his time. He often argued with the church and claimed, among other things, that the earth was a sphere and not a disc.
Like many thinkers in that era, he was fascinated by alchemy, the idea that you could somehow chemically transform a base metal like lead into gold, or transform other things. Alchemy wasn't just about making gold. It was about this idea of altering things from a lower state to a higher state.
An accident in his lab produced a result, a chemical with a blue pigment.
He actually shared a workshop with a painter. Now the two tools mixed and this rich blue dye was created.
Blue had only been available before then at massive cost. So the sudden availability of blue that was scalable meant it exploded. The Prussian army used it for their uniforms, hence its name, Prussian blue.
Prussian blue raised Dipple's profile, but fame soon turned to notoriety.
Dipple, though, wasn't interested in pigments and paints. His real focus lay in the search for immortality.
It was rumored that a tunnel connected the castle to the village below, and it was used by Johann Conrad Dipple in his scientific experiments.
It seems like Dipple was someone who often kind of freaked out the people around him. There's a lot of stories about people being warned about his experiments, what he was doing.
He experimented and tried to find the elixir of life. His constant search for something and constant experimentation did not suit many people in the area, who were mostly Christian.
Dipple's methods combined science with the supernatural. He searched for a cure to death by experimenting on the living.
Dipple was fixated with ideas about the human soul and its meaning. And in order to experiment with this, he engaged in soul transference. In other words, finding animals and trying to swap one soul from one to another.
He also had this idea that if he could boil down animal bones and extract some kind of essence from them, he would have an elixir that would be extremely powerful.
After years of work, Dipple had a breakthrough. He produced a substance which he called Dipple's oil.
He developed this disgusting, greasy liquid from this process that he believed was a secret to very long life and thought it was something of immense value.
Dipple's oil may not have been an elixir of life, but as an insecticide and a weapon of war, it had its uses.
At one point, he actually tried to buy the castle by trading it for his formula for his elixir. He also claimed that his elixir would help him live to be 130 years old.
But rumors began to circulate that Dipple experimented on the bodies of people.
It's said that he had a particular like for exhuming dead bodies after dark, and he'd try and dig out the fresher bodies because he believed it still contained some of their soul within them.
Allegedly, there is a passage inside the castle directly to Burbach. Thus, the passage, which is said to have existed, could also be for getting body parts.
Rumors remain about Dipple's research, but for all his efforts, he failed to bottle immortality.
Dipple died of a stroke in 1734. But some claimed that he was poisoned because he was so unpopular with the locals.
After Dipple's death, Castle Frankenstein faded into obscurity. But in 1814, a young woman traveled with her fiancé through central Prussia. Her name was Mary Shelley.
On that journey, they stopped at Gernsheim, which is only 10 miles away from Frankenstein's castle, and you can see the castle from there. It's entirely possible that she heard tales from locals and people in the party of the castle, and even possibly of some of its most notorious inhabitants.
4 years later, Mary Shelley published her debut novel, Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein became one of the most iconic horror novels of all time. It has been in reprint all over the world.
It was an incredibly visionary piece of work, especially amazing. The woman who wrote it was only 18 years old.
Shelley's story about a scientist who made life out of death mirrored the legend of Johann Conrad Dipple. To many, Dipple was the original Dr. Frankenstein.
It's certainly plausible that some thread of this story was something she picked up along the way. The fact that she used the name Frankenstein for her doctor is one hint. We'll probably never know, but it's certainly fun to think about that connection.
Today, Castle Frankenstein is a tourist hotspot.
In the dense forests of the Czech Republic is Huska Castle. According to legend, it was built on top of a portal to hell. And in the late 1930s, it attracted the attention of some notorious occultists.
When the Second World War broke out in 1939, the Waffen-SS took the castle for themselves.
Their leader, Heinrich Himmler, is said to have been fascinated by the supernatural.
It's theorized that Himmler genuinely believed that the power of the old occult masters would help the Nazis rule the world.
Himmler is said to have used his power to collect as many books about witchcraft, the supernatural, and the occult as possible. His collection totaled approximately 13,000 books and manuscripts.
The castle was soon used in service of his obsession.
When the Allies were bombarding Germany, they brought books from chapels and churches. They brought occult Jewish Kabbalah and Masonic literature here.
But stories persist that the SS used Huska as more than just a library.
Locals claimed to have heard moans, screams, and cries in many different languages coming from the castle at night.
And the rumor went around that it was being used for sort of fringe scientific experiments on human subjects.
Some claim that the SS were attempting to create super soldiers by performing black magic rituals.
The rituals were the same, well, similar to the ones done by priests during baptisms, surprisingly. But it's done using different, darker energies. The subjects died during the ceremony. That's a fact.
Once the war had ended, the castle was used as a children's sanctuary. One of its former residents told Miroslav an unsettling story.
They were playing in a wooden shed and found dead Germans under the floor. They weren't allowed to leave the castle for 4 days. Weird uniformed men came. They weren't soldiers, firefighters, or policemen. I think they were Germans, but in different uniforms. And they were showing them what they used to do here during the war.
The truth of what happened here may never be known, but there is no doubt that a very real evil did stalk these halls.
It's clear that Himmler and some of his crackpot henchmen in the SS were profoundly into the occult, but there's also a lot of exaggeration around how widespread that was.
Sometimes it's difficult for us to understand how people could be so evil, so we conjure these wild conspiracy theories to try to explain human psychology that we can't comprehend.
After the war, Huska was seized by the communist state. It was finally returned to Zuzana's family in the 1990s. Today, she is working to preserve the castle and all its legends for future generations.
In our family, we say that things should be made better, not worse. So I don't think that I have the option not to preserve it. It's a certain continuity, tradition. That's how I see it.
Tolga Ersbeck was one of those who dreamt up this mind-bending project.
We wanted to create an extraordinary city, a development that would attract the attention of the entire world.
The idyllic surroundings chosen for the project provided more than just a desirable view.
The region is famous for its natural beauty and its thermal springs, which have been in use as far back as Roman times.
It was these thermal springs that first drew the attention of the company behind this massive project.
This is Burj Al Babas. It was to be as unique in design as it was in scale.
We were inspired by Victorian architecture, combining influences from Turkey's Galata Tower and the Maiden Tower.
Much like how the famous Disney castle logo was inspired and influenced by grand European castles, you feel like the architects may have taken a few liberties.
They were not replicas. They took fantastical ideas and made it their own.
What they were selling here was, for a price, your own slice of a fantasy world.
This design wasn't just an architectural experiment, but a sales tactic.
Before deciding on this design, 15 to 20 different models were produced. As a result of our research on the tastes of the people we would sell to, we decided on this Victorian-inspired architecture.
The target market for this development was people from the Middle East, from Kuwait, from Saudi Arabia, from UAE. They're going to love the trees, the mountains, and they're going to appreciate the fantasy that has been set up in this development.
It seems to have worked.
When we started, the demand was much greater than we expected. It was a different kind of project, and it got a lot of attention.
Construction began in 2014 with a $200 million budget.
The asking price for each of the chateaus would be between $400,000 and $500,000.
But there was a problem.
Most of the work we can see today hadn't even started when the plots were being sold.
The company had to show their clients what they were spending their money on.
They produced a catalogue with detailed 3D renderings of what each home looked like when finished. And these mock-ups dripped with luxury.
Buyers were promised homes fitted out with all mod cons.
The thermal waters were available inside all the villas. You could use it in the bathrooms and jacuzzis.
The pièce de résistance, though, was the roof balcony, which offered views out over the entire development.
In addition to hundreds of fantastical homes, there would be plenty of amenities on offer.
This wasn't just an area with these castles. This was to be a whole development that really felt like a resort.
This is the entrance reception, our customer acceptance area. We would have restaurants and fast food next door, and there would be special restaurants for Far Eastern, French, and Turkish cuisine.
The region's famed thermal waters would be the main draw to this massive structure.
We would have thermal baths, jacuzzis, plunge pools, steam rooms, and saunas.
Inside, the large circular pools were to be surrounded by marble pillars, decorated with gilded scrolls, and views straight up to these huge domes suspended above.
The architecture of the main complex would be no less impressive than the rest of the development.
We're going to have nods to the U.S. Capitol, to St. Paul's Cathedral, just really very much over the top.
By 2017, construction was gathering pace. But Burj Al Babas would soon go from fantasy to nightmare.
With something of this scale so close to completion, you have to wonder what derailed the entire project.
The Turkish economy was tanking, and plummeting oil prices were hitting the developers' target market, the oil-rich Gulf clients, hard in the wallet. Sales were beginning to dry up, but the building work pressed on.
By 2018, the company was in serious trouble. They had only sold 350 out of the 587 chateaus they had built.
The construction company declared bankruptcy, and when they were no longer able to pay their workers, everything stopped.
By 2020, the company had cleared their debts and planned to restart construction. But hit by the COVID-19 pandemic and bad weather, the project was further delayed. Today, Tolga Özbek's organization believes that work will begin again soon.
We're planning on starting construction again in the coming months. It will open towards the end of 2023, and by 2024, all of the facilities will be fully operational.
They now want it to be even bigger and better than what was originally planned. There'll be 6 man-made lakes, a horse riding area, and even cable cars and a monorail.
To some, these plans are highly ambitious. To others, they are fantasy. But with international interest reigniting, perhaps Burj Al Babas is closer to reality than it might appear.
With 78% of the chateaus partially finished, it wouldn't take much to get the rest of the project completed as long as the money is there.
They have a new investor. They're optimistically moving forward.
All of our efforts will pay off, and we will be very happy to see this crazy project finished.
On a rocky outcrop of Aberdeenshire, Scotland, a silent ruin stands monument to an old foe.
This is a place of rugged, stormy, craggy coast with high cliffs tumbling down to rocky beaches.
High above the sea, you find ruins of an old castle. And as you move closer, you see this imposing gatehouse. This is the only way in and the only way out.
Over the centuries, this stronghold has been at the heart of Scotland's battle against its bitterest enemy. One fought by its bravest warrior that would inspire a Hollywood epic.
Nobody likes to see their homeland invaded by a foreigner. And there was an absolute determination to get rid of the English at any cost.
From burning a garrison alive to sneaking treasures past a regicidal army, this castle has seen it all.
Alastair Cunningham is a proud Scot. He spent many years studying the history of Dunnottar Castle and the role it played in Scotland's fight against their southern neighbour.
We are lucky that the buildings, although ruined, are really in fairly good order. And we can see different aspects of Scottish life and Scottish history all on one rock.
Hostilities with the English at Dunnottar first started in the late 13th century, when the Scottish King Alexander III died, with no obvious heir to his throne.
Perhaps stupidly, the Scots decided that they should ask Edward I of England who would be the most appropriate monarch. Edward, of course, chose the person that was most likely to do his bidding.
When Edward's choice of successor, John Balliol, refused to do as he wanted, he went to war.
In 1296, the dread English king invaded Scotland and effectively began treating it as his feudal territory.
And one of the positions that the English armies took was Dunnottar Castle because of its location and its strategic promise.
The Scottish noblemen couldn't get things together. They were too disparate to fight back until William Wallace, who we know from the movie Braveheart, brings them together.
Wallace inspired the Scots to take up what arms they had and fight back against the ruthless English King Edward.
Wallace rampaged through the Scottish lowlands, leading a string of successful attacks against English strongholds. In 1297, he reached Dunnottar.
William Wallace, the great patriot, rose up to re-establish Scottish domination, and his men besieged the rock.
Although Dunnottar was impressively fortified, the English defenders were just no match for the sheer ferocity of the Scots who poured over the walls.
The English garrison retreats, and they go into the chapel. hoping that because this is a sacred space, they'll be safe.
They barred the doors. Presumably they were on their knees.
And William Wallace goes, oh, you know, just burn them. So they set fire to the building, burning all the English inside. But eventually, as the tale ends badly for the Scots, as they are defeated.
William Wallace was eventually captured and executed by the English.
Yet the spirit of Wallace's rebellion lived on, and after 30 years of struggle, Scotland won its freedom, ushering in a new golden age at Dunotter.
From the 1400s, there's relative peace at the castle. They're able to build upon what they have, and it becomes a really luxurious space.
This was the dining room, great big fireplace, lovely south-facing windows with lots of light, big, probably decorated ceiling, tapestry on the wall there. And downstairs is the kitchen and the serving area.
Dunotter became one of the cornerstones of governance for the Scottish kingdom, ruled over by the Earl Marshal.
This was an important title that included responsibility for the protection of the crown jewels of Scotland, known as the Honours of Scotland.
But the peace at Dunotter was about to be shattered.
In the mid-1600s, England erupts into civil war.
The parliamentarian side was led by the Puritan Oliver Cromwell, who feverishly took the fight to the English king.
The Scots see an opportunity and throw their support behind Cromwell. They send troops to the south and play a major role in the defeat of King Charles I.
In 1649, Charles was executed. This, however, was a step too far for the Scots, who switched sides, backing the deceased monarch's son, Charles II.
After the death of his father, Charles II landed along the coast in Scotland and came to Dunotter in 1650 and spent several nights in the castle. He was then crowned hurriedly at Scone Palace, the traditional crowning place of Scottish kings.
And in response, Oliver Cromwell sent his forces north of the border in an invasion of Scotland.
And it was after that that the Honours of Scotland that had been used in the crowning had to be effectively smuggled back here because Cromwell's troops were patrolling this whole area.
While Charles escaped to France, Cromwell's parliamentarian forces made light work of the Scottish resistance, defeating their armies in the field and capturing every occupied castle, bar one, Dunotter.
In 1652, this was the only part of Scotland that wasn't under Cromwell's control, and he was damn determined that he was going to get those crown jewels.
So Cromwell orders up a siege, and he says, I want that castle, I want the honours of Scotland.
The Scottish forces that are there at the castle are outgunned, outmanned.
Despite this, a direct assault on Dunotter would have cost the lives of hundreds of Cromwell's men. So they just maintained the siege and pounded the castle with cannon fire.
It must have been fairly terrifying. There was no way out. Their days inevitably were numbered.
With defeat imminent, the defenders concocted a plan to win a different kind of victory.
And so the decision was taken that the Honours of Scotland needed to be smuggled out. And we think that it was probably from a window up here that the Honours of Scotland were lowered in 1652 down to a serving lady who then walked the Honours of Scotland, contained in a creel on her back, down to Kenneth Kirk. After 8 months, I think the defenders would have felt rather bruised and battered, both literally and psychologically. But the main thing they had to do was to save the honours of Scotland. And they must have felt absolutely triumphant when they saw in the half-light the old lady walking down the beach.
When the English finally do make it into the castle, of course they look everywhere for the honours of Scotland, and they are nowhere to be found.
Cromwell would go on to rule over Scotland until his death in 1658, at which time Charles II returned from exile to reclaim his throne, once again uniting the realm. Yet Dunotter's days as a seat of power were nearing an end. In the 1700s, the castle was stripped of all of its valuables, and then finally abandoned. Today, Dunotter Castle is a popular tourist attraction. Luckily, certain English visitors can expect a warmer reception than they might have received in years past.
The now King Charles III visited the castle in 2019, and today he fares far better in Scotland than either of his predecessors had done.
Perched on the cliffs of Cruden Bay in Scotland is a sprawling ruin that helped inspire the world's most famous Gothic villain.
There's absolutely nothing to obscure the view of this place, so you can see it from miles and miles away.
And clearly built in a strategic defensive position, right up against steep cliffs, with further protection from ravines and ramparts.
There's bricks, there's mortar, there's different types of limestone and granite.
It becomes apparent that this has gone through a number of building phases. It's been extended and added to over a long period of time, perhaps over many centuries.
You can identify turrets and crenellations and dramatic arches, and then you have these circular towers connected by curtain walls.
Battles, secret agents, treachery, links to the Spanish Armada. This castle has enough intrigue to fill several thrillers.
But at its core is an unmistakable feature that links to the castle's most enduring mystery.
Imagine a man stalking its hallways, sweeping his cloak dramatically, engaging with dark thoughts.
There's one thing that attracts people to this place today, and that's its connection with a certain creature of the night.
Author Mike Shepard grew up in nearby Cruden Bay, with this epic ruin dominating the horizon.
Slade's Castle was a very dramatic feature not far from my house. And of course, I wanted to investigate the history and started digging in.
In the late 16th century, the Hayes family were the dominant power in eastern Aberdeenshire. Francis Hay, the 9th Earl of Errol, held that power at Old Slains Castle, 5 miles from this site, until Scotland threw out the Catholic religion and James VI became Scotland's first Protestant king.
The 9th Earl of Errol actually converted to Catholicism, and he started to plot against the Protestant king, James.
The Earl joined others in an uprising, and the battle took place just 50 miles from here. But the Catholic forces were so weakened that the cause was over.
Guilty of treason, the 9th Earl fled abroad. And King James took his revenge on the Earl's beloved Slains Castle.
The Earl had been scheming with the Spanish. In 1594, King James had the castle blown up for this treachery.
A few years later, the Earl renounced his Catholicism and returned from exile.
And he decides to rebuild his castle on his family seat.
You can see the original tower, built in the cliff with its foundation starting halfway up this craggy inlet.
It would become known as New Slains Castle, and in its shadow, a legend was born.
It was extensively rebuilt in 1837 as a huge mansion house.
It was this palatial home that author Bram Stoker stumbled upon in the 1890s during a very particular search.
He systematically set out to find a place where he could do his writing and started to walk down the coast towards Aberdeen, looking for a special place.
He came across this beautiful old castle and he examined it, and then he went down, he explored the fishing village that was a short walk away, and he really fell in love with the place.
Stoker telegraphed his wife, Florence, calling for her and their son Noel to join him at the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel in Cruden Bay. Then just a part-time writer, his discovery of this location proved inspirational and life-changing as stories began streaming out of his mind and onto paper.
2 of his books were set here in Cruden Bay, The Watter's Moo and The Mystery of the Sea. And these books came either side of his most famous book, possibly the most famous Gothic novel of all time, Dracula.
Bram Stoker spent a lot of time researching Dracula here, and he took inspiration from local fishermen and other local folks that he interviewed, getting stories of ghostly tales and legends and lore.
In a number of ways, you can see how this was the inspiration for Dracula's castle in Transylvania.
Some intriguing connections to Slains Castle emerge from the pages of the novel when the story's protagonist arrives at the front entrance.
Jonathan Harker is dropped off at Castle Dracula, but his mysterious driver suddenly disappears, leaving him alone standing in front of this enormous Gothic edifice. He's in the middle of nowhere.
And he goes out to the front door, and he is totally astonished to find that there's no bell, there's no door knocker, and he starts to panic.
Now, Slains Castle similarly had no doorbell or knocker, despite being a huge palace-like castle. That can't be a coincidence, can it?
But suddenly, the doors creak open, and he is greeted by Count Dracula himself, who leads him through to a distinctive room.
From above, you can clearly see this 8-sided octagonal room at the heart of the castle.
Now, I've actually got a photograph from 1900 which shows the octagonal room inside the castle here. And it's exact look-alike for the room described by Bram Stoker in Dracula. A small octagonal room with a single lamp hanging from the ceiling.
But Stoker wasn't just using the castle for visual references. He seemed to be immersing himself into Dracula's world.
Bram's wife and son actually commented on his strange behavior.
He was a totally changed personality while he was writing Dracula. They were all frightened of him when he was writing.
According to his wife, he'd march onto the beach pacing up and down, and he could be seen sitting perched like a giant bat on the rocks of the shore.
His son said that he was very brooding and very difficult to reach and to deal with during that time.
And there's been speculation since that he was tapping into the method acting techniques, and like the best method actor, lost himself in the role of the blood-sucking count.
In May 1897, Dracula was published, forever cementing the Count and his castle into the popular imagination. Stoker continued to visit Cruden Bay until 1910, just a few years before his passing, by this time a celebrated novelist. In 1916,
the 20th Earl of Errol was forced to sell New Slains, ending more than 300 years of Hayes family ownership. Soon after, it was partially demolished and stripped bare. The castle is a shell of its former glory, but there is increasing recognition of the connection between this place and Bram Stoker.
The 125th anniversary of the publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula was celebrated here in 2022.
And Dacre Stoker, the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, decided that the most appropriate place to celebrate that was here in Cruden Bay, including a visit to Slains Castle here. And that's starting to excite a lot of interest, not just here in Scotland, but throughout the world.
In southern Poland is a commanding residence rumored to harbor a precious secret.
Up on the hilltop, kind of above the tree line, is this grand, majestic structure.
Inside, that splendor continues. Red carpeted staircases lead up to huge hallways with marble floors.
Yet this opulent citadel contains hidden depths. Behind an ordinary-looking door is a secret subterranean world.
As your eyes adjust, you start to get a sense of just how large this space is. It's like you're walking through a railway tunnel.
Some of the tunnels even seem to have collapsed or have been deliberately destroyed, perhaps to hide something.
For decades, tales were told of a brutal regime's riches that went missing in this exact area. In 2016, it appeared the truth would finally be revealed.
And everybody's waiting for the moment when we finally get to see the thing we're looking for. Nazi gold.
There's been some sort of fortification here since the late 1200s, but over time it's been destroyed and rebuilt.
In the early 1500s, the Hoburg family took control, and their descendants owned it right up into the 20th century. But in 1941, the Nazi regime confiscated the castle from its owners.
When the Germans invaded and occupied Poland during the Second World War, they seized many lavish residences. This one is called Change Castle, and it served as the Führer's imperial headquarters in this region.
They wanted to make it a palace fit for Hitler himself. And in 1943, work began on remodeling the interiors to fit his tastes.
The Nazis are going to rip out everything they think of as decadent or over-decorative.
But it was below ground the biggest changes were made.
To ensure his safety, a private escape elevator was installed just opposite Hitler's bedroom door.
The elevator led to a vast underground network, excavated at great human cost by inmates from a nearby concentration camp. The sheer scale of the tunnel system suggests it was much more than just a place for Hitler to hide.
Germany is under immense stress by this point in the war. Scarce war materials like concrete, reinforcing bar, all of these things which could be used anywhere in the German Reich are being used here. What is it that justifies their use in this place?
Historians have theorized that they could have been anything from bomb-proof underground factories to chemical or even nuclear research labs.
There is another theory that might explain what these tunnels were used for. Change Castle has long been linked to a legend forged in the dying days of the Second World War. It began when the Soviet Red Army approached the Nazi-occupied city of Breslau, 60 miles from here.
It's said that during the chaos of the evacuation, an armored train was loaded up with more than 330 tons of gold, a vast array of jewels, weaponry, and priceless works of art.
So the train supposedly left the city just before the attack and started heading down the line nearby that ran to the castle.
The legend has it that this armored train rattled through one station, but never came to the next station.
But huge armored trains don't just disappear. The story goes that there was a railway line leading into these tunnel networks, and that once the train had passed through, the entrance to the tunnel was blown up, hiding the train inside.
Piotr Koper is a treasure hunter who has spent over a decade searching for Hitler's lost gold. He suspects the tunnels below Change Castle were a secret underground train line once connected to the main railway line, only 2 miles from here.
This connection is not a matter of faith or just a story. Hitler's headquarters had to be connected directly to the railway line. We believe that the train is waiting for us in one of the tunnels linked to Change Castle.
In August 2015, Piotr and his business partner made an exciting discovery under an earthen embankment adjacent to the main railway line.
We started our investigations here because of the testimonies of witnesses who said that they saw a tunnel entrance in this area.
The fortune hunters used ground-penetrating radar to build up an image of what was hidden below ground.
The results showed clear railway composition. It was hard to say because there's a lot of pipes and iron here, but it also showed train carriages lined up, one after the other.
It's so exciting, the idea that at long last, after decades of tales of Nazi gold, we're finally gonna find some.
In 2016, Piotr Koper believed he had found it, entombed at a spot 2 miles away from the castle. Local authorities gave him just 7 days to complete his investigation because the train line running next to the excavation site had to be shut down during this time. On August 16th, the dig began.
The world's media descended. I mean, they were following every moment.
There was a lot on the line for Piotr and his partner. Not only had they invested a reported $131,000 in the dig, their reputations were also at stake.
After about 20 feet, we hit an unbreakable rock. We tried another 3 trenches, but always at the same depth. It was completely solid.
The clock was ticking.
We prepared the drilling rig for the next day, but it was raining heavily. The drill operators said that it was impossible to drill until the ground had hardened. But we just didn't have time, as that was the last day of our permission.
So after 7 days of digging, they found nothing. No tunnel, no gold, no train.
In the spotlight of the world's media, Piotr and his team were forced to give up.
As the Polish saying goes, success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. Unfortunately, the second one has happened to us.
Although Piotr's hunt for the Nazi gold train didn't go as planned, the media attention did provide an unexpected boost to the region's economy.
An official from a nearby town actually admitted that during the year of the dig, tourism was up 44%.
And who knows? Perhaps the Nazi gold train is still out there, waiting to be found.